The letters we never sent, the sketches we forgot, and the sea that waited, a story of siblings, silence, and the memory of wind. It began with a letter, a real one written in pen, stamped, and delivered to the gallery as if time had paused somewhere in the past. There was no return address, only her name, handwritten in a slanted, uneven script she hadn't seen in over a decade. She read it twice before recognition struck like a distant thunderclap. It was from her brother. Her older brother Junso, who had vanished 15 years ago without a trace, without a word, leaving behind only confusion and hollow spaces in every conversation where his name once lived. Time had not softened the blow of his disappearance. If anything, the years had frozen the memories in place, untouched, brittle, suspended like film caught between frames. He had left the morning of her high school entrance ceremony, a day meant for beginnings, but instead marked by absence. His vanishing became a ghost in their household, showing up in silences at dinner, in arguments that stumbled into grief, and most often in the quiet tremble of their mother's crying when she thought no one was listening. And now, after all those years, the letter said he was sick. Liver cancer, stage 4. He lived in a coastal town called Namhai, now a place defined by its openness, where the ocean stretched beyond sight and the wind carried things far away. He was asking her to come, asking her to visit before it was too late. She didn't know what compelled her to go. Perhaps it was the finality in his words, the sharpness of mortality bleeding through the ink. Perhaps it was curiosity, guilt, or the unfinished ache that had been festering quietly for half her life. Whatever it was, it stirred something too deeply rooted to ignore. She packed her bags without telling anyone, not even the man she'd shared 3 years of her life with. She didn't explain, didn't make plans. She simply left Seoul as if shedding a skin she no longer wanted to inhabit. The journey to Namhae was long, the kind of quiet ride where thoughts tangled themselves into knots. Outside, the world had begun to awaken into spring. Trees budded with promises, petals scattered like secrets, and the air carried a softness that reminded her of childhoods she had long since buried. When she arrived, the station was empty of familiar faces. She waited for a while, unsure if she had misunderstood. Eventually, a boy with a flushed face and sunburned nose gestured her over and handed her a note. Junso couldn't walk far, the boy said. He worked down by the dock, though not as often now. His body didn't always allow it. She remembered Junso as tall, mischievous, and full of reckless energy and wild laughter that filled their small apartment like sunlight. The boy she used to race through alleys with and whisper secrets to. But the man who opened the door to the weather-beaten house was a stranger, shaped like someone she once knew. He was thin, hollow in the cheeks, with skin yellowed at the edges. A portable oxygen tank stood beside the door like a silent sentinel. There was no embrace, no awkward reunion filled with scripted words, just a long pause, heavy with unspoken years. They stared at one another across a threshold of time, not knowing how to cross it. His eyes held a tiredness that went beyond illness, something deeper, a weariness carved from regret. Inside, the house was small and filled with salt in the air, in the wood, and in the smell of the floorboards. It reeked of old meals, medicine, and dampness. The walls were lined with photographs, none of which included her or anyone from their family. Just boats, coastlines, and unfamiliar faces that had formed the world he had built away from them. She had intended to stay only for a few days, a visit, a farewell, closure. But something held her there, tethered by a mixture of confusion, sorrow, and something more elusive. Perhaps it was the way the sea looked from his porch, or the sound of the wind echoing with half-remembered lullabies. The days took on a rhythm. She cleaned, cooked, and walked. He sat by the window or on the porch, wrapped in blankets, eyes fixed on the horizon, as if waiting for a ship that might never return. They spoke little, but not out of malice. Words had no place where everything was already known. In that silence, memories resurfaced. She remembered bike rides down steep hills, arms stretched wide like wings. She remembered thunderstorms and the way they'd hidden together in closets, hands clutched tight. She remembered the fights, too. The night he had punched their father. The sight of blood pooled on kitchen tiles. The echo of a door slammed shut. The beginning of his disappearance. She had hated him once. Hated him for turning absence into punishment. For letting silence become his legacy. But now, watching his frail frame, hearing his breath catch in his chest, she wasn't sure what she felt. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it wasn't hate either. It was something rawer, quieter, like grief that had outlived its purpose and become something else entirely. One afternoon, she found an old sketchbook buried beneath fishing magazines and dust. The pages were filled with drawings, all unfinished but undeniably his. There were boats, endless seas, and waves in motion. Each stroke was filled with longing and silence, with a kind of devotion she hadn't expected. He had drawn the ocean over and over again, but never once the sky. She remembered him saying once when they were younger that the sea was honest, that it never lied. And somehow, as she flipped through those pages, she understood. The sea didn't pretend. It simply existed, relentless, ever-changing, but true. As April waned, she began to notice changes. His steps became slower, his sleep deeper, and his appetite faded. The air around him shifted. A kind of quiet resignation hung in the corners of the room. She began sitting beside him longer at night, watching his chest rise and fall, uncertain each time whether it would rise again. That was when she began writing letters of her own. Each night, she folded a page and left it on the small table near his bed. She poured her heart into those letters, memories, regrets, and things she never knew how to say. She wrote of waiting for him at the station when she was 15, of how their father died, alone and full of rage, of how sometimes she whispered to the wind, hoping her words might reach him across the years. He never spoke of the letters, but each morning they would be gone. And she would write another. The days narrowed as April dissolved into May, and she began to feel time thinning around them like the air before a storm. Each morning arrived quieter than the one before, and the weight of waiting settled on her shoulders with greater certainty. There was no announcement, no single moment when she knew he was nearing the end. But she felt it in the way he stared at the sea longer now, in the way his hands lingered on the arms of his chair, as if the wood could steady the parts of him unraveling. She took to watching him from a distance when he slept. His breaths came shallow and strained, his fingers sometimes twitching against the blanket, as though he dreamed of things beyond words. The letters she continued to write piled slowly in her notebook, even though she still left one each night on the table beside him. She never asked where they went, and he never offered. The act itself had become enough. One morning she walked the shoreline before sunrise. The waves came in soft and slow, brushing against her ankles like a lullaby. Sea glass sparkled in the damp sand, and she collected a few pieces, pressing them into her palm. There was peace there, raw, salt-stung, but honest. She thought about how they had grown into separate people. Two branches, once from the same tree, now twisted in different directions, shaped by wind and absence. He had chosen solitude. She had chosen survival. Both paths, it seemed, had come with their own bruises. She spent that day cleaning the house more thoroughly than usual, as if preparing it for something unseen. She rearranged the photographs on the wall and polished the wooden floor with slow, measured movements. The light from the sea came in golden, softening the cracked paint and faded fabrics. It didn't feel like a house of dying. It felt like something preserved. That evening, she sat outside long after the sun had gone. The sky above the ocean glowed with the last remnants of twilight, and stars began to pierce through the darkness, one by one. She thought of childhood again, of Junso's old telescope, the one he used to drag out to their apartment balcony so he could map constellations. She had never understood what he was looking for. Now, she thought perhaps he hadn't either. When she returned inside, he was asleep. His face looked calmer than it had in days, as though whatever pain tethered him had loosened. She didn't wake him. Instead, she sat by his side, holding the sketchbook she had found. She flipped through the pages slowly, tracing each pencil stroke like it was part of a forgotten language. On the last page, she found something she hadn't seen before. A new drawing has barely started. A faint outline of sky above the ocean, only the suggestion of it, but it was there. It was the first and only time he had ever drawn the sky. She fell asleep in the chair beside him. When morning came, the light reached through the window in long, diagonal bands. The room was quiet, still, wrapped in a silence that felt complete. She already knew. There was no panic, no cry, only a stillness that settled in her chest like a heavy tide. She stood beside him for a long time. Her hand hovered over his, and though it no longer responded, the memory of warmth lingered. She didn't cry immediately. Instead, she opened the window. The sea breeze wandered in, filling the room with salt and sky. After the coroner came and the body was taken, she remained in the house for another day. She cleaned again, though there was nothing left to clean. The silence was different now, emptier, yes, but also softer, like the house itself had exhaled. A week later, the package arrived. It was wrapped in brown paper, tied with twine. Her name was written once again in that same uncertain handwriting, though fainter now. Inside were the sketchbook and a single letter. 5 lines, written with effort. She read the last sentence over and over until it settled into her bones. She kept the letter in her wallet. The sketchbook stayed on her bedside table. It became her habit to flip through it whenever sleep refused to come. Each drawing felt like a conversation resumed. Not with the man he became, but with the boy she remembered. The one who once pulled her through crowds, who shared stolen candy, who built imaginary worlds in the corners of their small apartment. The seasons turned. Summer came and passed in Seoul, and with it the ordinary motion of life. People asked where she had gone. She offered vague answers, ones that didn't require follow-ups. Her partner noticed a change in her, something quieter in the way she moved. He never pushed, and she never quite explained. Every spring, she returned to Namhae. She rented the same room near the cliffs. The house had been sold. She had made sure it went to someone who would care for it, but she still walked the same paths and still sat by the sea with the sketchbook resting in her lap. Sometimes she wrote more letters. She didn't leave them anywhere now. She simply folded them and let the wind take them, page by page, scattering them into the sky. She came to believe that grief was not a wound to be healed, but a companion to be carried. It softened over time, but never truly left. It became the color of her thoughts on rainy days. It became the hush between certain songs. And most of all, it became the shape of her memories, not sharp anymore, but not dulled either, just real. She never looked for answers about why he left. The truth, she understood, lived in fragments, and not all of them were meant to be found. What mattered more was that in the end he had reached out, that she had gone, that they had touched again, even briefly, across the rift time had carved. On her last visit to Namhae, she stood by the cliff edge at dusk, the wind pressing against her back like a hand. The sea shimmered below, stretching out endlessly, its surface broken only by light. She closed her eyes and let the sound wash over her, the pull of tides, the whistle of air through grass, the hush of memory returning. She imagined him there not as he was, but as he once had been. Barefoot, laughing, sketchbook under one arm, eyes full of questions. He did not speak. He simply looked toward the horizon. She stayed until the stars appeared. Then, quietly, she turned back toward the path and walked home.